Some tragedies never end. Ask people to name a nuclear disaster, and most will probably point to Fukushima in Japan 3 years ago. The nuclear meltdown at Chernobyl in Ukraine was 30 years ago, but the crisis is still with us today. That's because radiation virtually never dies. After the explosion in 1986, the Soviets built a primitive sarcophagus, a tomb, to cover the stricken reactor, but it wasn't meant to last very long, and it hasn't. Engineers say there's still enough radioactive material in there to cause widespread contamination. For the last 5 years, a massive project has been underway to seal the reactor permanently. But the undertaking is $750 million short, and the completion date has been delayed repeatedly. 30 years later, Chernobyl's crippled reactor still has the power to kill. It's called a zone, and getting into it is crossing a border into one of the most contaminated places on Earth. The 20-mile no man's land was evacuated nearly 30 years ago. But drive to the center of the zone today, and you'll see a massive structure that appears to rise out of nowhere. It's an engineering effort the likes of which the world has never seen. With funds from over 40 different countries, 1,400 workers are building a giant arch to cover the damaged reactor like a casserole. It will be taller than the Statue of Liberty and wider than Yankee Stadium, the largest movable structure on Earth. Nicholas Kai is overseeing the arch's construction.
You know, when you think about it, you had this massive project going on, all these people working here, billions of dollars being spent because of one day 30 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. It was the biggest disaster of the nuclear industry, yes.
The disaster was sparked by massive explosions that tore the roof off of Chernobyl's reactor number 4, spewing radioactive dust into the atmosphere. The Soviets drafted over 500,000 troops to put out the fire and clear the nuclear debris. Thousands got seriously ill from radiation exposure. Today, 3 decades later, the cleanup continues. But as this recent video shows, the reactor is still packed with poison. Heaps of gnarled steel and concrete, pools of nuclear fuel that have hardened into a dense mass called the elephant's foot. There's still so much radiation coming from the reactor that workers have to construct the arch nearly 1,000 feet away, shielded by a massive concrete wall. When finished, the arch will be slid into place around the sarcophagus, then sealed up.
We will push it in once. The average speed will be around 10 meters an hour, so it's approximately the speed of a snail.
Right, but that's pretty rapid considering the size of this thing.
It is, yes.
But the construction itself will have to move a lot quicker. The old plant and sarcophagus are falling apart. Just 2 years ago, a snowstorm caused the roof of one of the buildings to collapse, forcing workers to be evacuated and raising fears of further contamination. Radiation is not subject to the usual rules of life and death. It is virtually eternal. When Kai took us on a tour of the site, we were fitted with dosimeters to tell us how much we were being exposed to. Suddenly, a sound we didn't want to hear.
Hey, this beeper's going off.
No, it's not. It's normal.
You're sure?
Yes, I'm definitively sure.
I don't like a beeper in Chernobyl. I don't like that sound.
Building the arch under these conditions is challenging enough, but some of the biggest obstacles have nothing to do with radiation. As violence gripped Ukraine this year, one of the arch's contractors backed out. The project is also $770 million short and has been plagued by repeated delays. No matter when it's completed, vast stretches of the zone will never recover. This is the city of Pripyat, 2 miles from the reactor. 30 years ago, the population was 50,000. Today, it is 0. Pripyat was where many of the plant's workers lived, grateful for their posting in a town that was the model of Soviet modernity. 9-story apartment buildings lined this boulevard. They're still there, but you can't see them anymore. The forest has taken over. A vision, perhaps, of what the whole world might look like were people to just disappear. It was springtime in Pripyat that day in 1986, and an amusement park was due to open in a few days. Andrei Glukov lived here then.
So that Ferris wheel never had any kids in it?
Never had any kids. These bumper cars on your left
Right.
had never kids on it too.
When you talk to your former neighbors, what do you call it? The accident, the catastrophe?
We just call it 26, which was the date of the accident.
26.
26th of April,
Sort of like the Americans call 9/11.
exactly.
Back then, Glukov worked for Chernobyl's nuclear safety division. He took us on a tour through a part of the plant that had not been destroyed. He was off duty that night, but what he saw when he drove past the damaged reactor was like nothing he or anyone else had ever seen.
This was a terrifying picture. It looked like a sunset in a distance about 100, 200 yards from you. And this was the glowing core of the reactor.
That was the first and the only time you saw it?
No, that was the first time when I realized the scale of the disaster.
Glukov told his family in Pripyat to stay inside and close the windows. Soviet authorities covered the area with secrecy, told people they had nothing to worry about. But 36 hours later, over 1,000 buses were sent in to evacuate everyone. Authorities told people it would only be for 3 days. One of many lies. The people never came back, and Pripyat is being overwhelmed by the elements. One of the only things still recognizable is that old Soviet iconography. Drive through the zone, and you'll find that many villages suffer the same fate as Pripyat. A row of simple markers has been planted with the names of each one. But amidst this wilderness, the strangest sight of all, people. Just a few. Ivan Ivanovich and his wife Maria were evacuated to an apartment block near Kiev after the accident, but couldn't take it. They weren't made for the city, so 2 years later they came back. Today, there are 3 other people living in this village, just a few miles from the old power plant.
When you decided to come back to live here, did anyone tell you it was dangerous?
Ну чого? Нормально.
It's really okay here. You know, when I lived in that apartment block, I got sick all the time. But when I came back here, I was fine. And I've been fine ever since.
You should never leave home.
I would be long gone if I'd stayed there. I'd be in the ground.
Despite the danger, Tim Mousseau also chose to be here. For the last 15 years, the University of South Carolina biologist has been studying the contamination's impact from a makeshift lab inside the zone.
Aren't many serious labs I've seen that look like this.
Yeah, this is an opportunistic lab. It's an old villager's house.
Mousseau's research has shown that the catastrophe continues to take its toll.
And we're going to attempt to measure just how radioactive these mice are.
What's the comparison between the amounts of radiation a mouse would have here and a mouse somewhere else?
Some of these mice have on the order of 10,000 times more radioactivity in their bodies than in clean areas.
The human toll has been profound as well. Thyroid cancer and leukemia affected thousands, though the exact number of deaths is still being debated.
There certainly is evidence that some of the genetic damage that occurs at the level of the DNA can be transmitted from one generation to the next.
So a nuclear disaster is never over.
There will be areas that will be contaminated for thousands, if not millions of years.
This makes the zone like no other place on Earth, which is why it's attracting tourists. If you've done Paris and Rome, why not try a holiday in hell? Check out the apocalypse.
How did your friends react when you told them you were coming on vacation to Chernobyl?
They thought it was very strange, yeah. But I mean, people have been coming here for a while, so I guess it must be safe.
You guess it must be safe. What makes you believe it's safe?
Well, would assume that the guides wouldn't bring people here if it wasn't safe.
Right, well, I hope you're right.
So do I.
Thousands of workers fled into the zone every day to look after what remains of the plant. Others live here year-round in one of the few places safe enough for inhabitants, the town of Chernobyl itself. Yevgen Goncharenko was our guide. He lives here too.
Why are you living here and not in Kiev?
Because I like this place. For me, it's very interesting, maybe even sacred place.
A sacred place?
For me, yeah.
He spends much of his time writing music on his bass guitar. Music as desolate as the landscape surrounding him. As desolate as the remains of this empire that has long since disappeared. A decade after the disaster, workers here built a monument honoring their colleagues whose lives had been destroyed.
The workers and the firemen made the monument themselves?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And what does it say?
Тим, хто врятував світ, to those who saved the world.
To those who saved the world.
That may sound a bit hyperbolic, but when the reactor exploded in 1986, radioactive dust and debris were carried as far away as Italy and Sweden. Until the arch finally seals up that stricken reactor, and no one knows when that might be, something like that could happen again. Unlike other historic relics, Chernobyl does not belong to the past. Its power will never die. Chernobyl is forever. The Klondike. It's always been about gold since the first gold rush in the late 19th century, when miners stampeded into the Yukon, a pristine area in northwest Canada, just east of Alaska. It's been more a bust than boom since then, but recently a new stream of money has been rushing into the Yukon, largely because of the discoveries of one prospector. He used to be a penniless trapper and mushroom picker, but the gold he says he's found could be worth billions. And that might be just the beginning, because the government has decided to open a whole new stretch of wilderness to mining. Miners and prospectors are a secretive lot, but we decided to take our chances and see what's happening in the Yukon, a place that's changed very little since the first gold rush over 100 years ago. It's one of the most remote stretches of wilderness in North America, home to more caribou than people. Thousands cavort over the mountaintops in their annual migration. The Canadian territory is bigger than California, but only 36,000 people live here in scattered communities like Dawson, a dirt road town next to the Yukon River that was ground zero for the first gold rush. There's an Old West feel to the town. They still dance and gamble at Diamond Tooth Gertie's, tourists and locals. You can tell them apart. The tourists come here for the history and pan like the old-timers. A lot of real gold miners still work around town. They bring their discoveries in mason jars and coffee cans to an unmarked shack That's where Simon works, at home. He buys miners' gold and melts it down. Anywhere else there would be guards and guns, but Simon, who asked us not to use his last name or reveal his address, just went about his business, proving that gold doesn't really glitter until you give it a scrubbing and turn it into a dazzling bar worth $200,000.
Have you ever sort of calculated how much gold has passed through this shed in the last 18 years?
I wouldn't want to comment on it, but there's been a bit, yeah.
One guy we've been hanging out with says that he gives you about $10 million worth a year. That's pretty good, huh?
Yeah, he probably does.
But why is everybody so secretive around here?
Well, who knows? You know, and it's like everybody's bank account. You're not going to flop your checkbook out in front of me and show me the balance.
In the last gold rush, 30,000 miners burst into Dawson. Some struck it rich. Many others went broke or died. Dawson looks pretty much the same today. You can still see the old miner shacks near the aptly named Bonanza Creek, where the first gold was discovered. It's called placer gold, the name used for river gold.
The old prospectors would put a shaft down under the creek.
Sean Ryan, a prospector, says a lot of placer gold has been mined here.
They figure at the turn of the century there was somewhere between 13 and 20 million ounces of placer gold taken out of the Klondike.
Which was worth what then?
Right now that'd be worth well over, between 13 and 20 billion dollars worth of gold. So at today's prices, so.
100 years later, they're still mining the same creeks and riverbanks. The miners use backhoes now, not the gold pans you see in Clint Eastwood movies. Ian Thomas is digging dirt that's already been mined once. He's looking for leftovers. His equipment separates rock from dirt and then gives the dirt a bath to wash out the gold.
How you doing?
We have good years, we have bad years. In other words, you don't really want to answer the question. Not really.
Dave Miller also didn't want to tell us how much gold he finds, but he did show us the Frisbee-like device he uses to separate his gold from dirt.
I mean, that looks like gold.
Yes, that is gold. That is placer gold. There's about 2 ounces of gold in there.
Okay.
So that's $2,400.
This is $2,400.
Yeah.
Then Miller showed us the most valuable thing his family's found in 40 years, a 3-ounce nugget.
Now that's impressive.
He let you hold it for a while, but just for a while. There are no free samples in Dawson.
We don't find too many nuggets anymore. This is big stuff compared to what we find today.
But prospector Sean Ryan says he's found a lot of big stuff, and investors have poured money into the Yukon because of him. Ryan doesn't dig up riverbanks, he prospects in the mountains. It's more challenging, and if you do it right, he says, infinitely more lucrative.
So now you're a multimillionaire. And look at you, you don't look like a multimillionaire.
Well, listen, all I feel like is a squirrel that just found the big acorn patch. And I got a bunch of acorns at the base of the tree. So you don't really change.
Not that long ago, Sean Ryan was dead broke. To survive, he trapped animals and picked mushrooms. He says you can make $50,000 a season picking these delectable morels. When we heard that mushroom picking helped Ryan become a gold prospector, we went to track him down on a steep, burned-out mountainside, where he still picks mushrooms for fun.
Okay, into the mushroom patch. This was last year's fire.
Started by lightning?
Yeah.
How do you know where to look?
Well, that's where you research it. These mushrooms come 1 year after a forest fire, and it only happens for a month. It's kind of like magic. They magically appear, and it's only in that period of time in history, and then they go dormant for the next 200 or 300 years or until the next forest fire.
The magic mushrooms got him through some pretty tough times.
We lived in a 300-foot square shack, turn-of-the-century cabin with no running water or electricity.
Were you warm enough in the wintertime?
Pretty well. Sometimes your hair would get stuck to the back wall if it was 40 below.
When there was money to spare, Ryan could afford to do aerial surveys of charred forests. He started researching soil quality, topography, and the contour of the land. He found even more mushrooms and discovered that the same research that helped him find the morels could help him find gold.
I actually give a lot of credit to my gold discoveries based on the mushroom picking, because I was able to understand scientifically the parameters of why these mushrooms grow up here and roughly how many is going to come out of each different fire.
Now, you say that you come to a place like this and there are no mushrooms, but you have faith that they're going to pop up.
That's exactly it.
Must be quite a thrill.
Well, it is. And that's about the same thrill as predicting where gold is.
Sean Ryan says all the gold found in the rivers had to come from somewhere, most likely from the mountains. And that's where he's staked more than 50,000 claims. He and his team walk the ridges and take soil samples they send to a lab for analysis. Finding gold is always a long shot, and the unexpected can happen at any time.
Look, there's a bear right here. Hey! Hey! Okay, where's your bear spray? Where's the bear spray? Go! Yo, bear! Hey! There he is. Look at the dog doesn't know. Look at the bear's trying to figure out. Ooh, look at this.
Go get him, son. Go get him.
Sean and his team lucked out with the bear. All he has to do now is get lucky with the soil.
So the idea is that when we run these ridges...
He taught himself how to study maps and surveys and how to use a computer to help evaluate his claim and try to find the hot spots.
The pinks are where the pay dirt is.
Yeah.
Okay, but what percentage of hot spots actually will give you gold?
I'd give that 1 in 10,000.
Are you serious?
Because the probability, this is the only probability where the norm is to fail.
To better his odds, Ryan and his team use a drone that makes a detailed aerial survey of his claim. They also send electrical charges 300 feet into the ground to get more precise physical data on where the gold might be located. The images from the drone and the electric data help create a three-dimensional underground virtual map, which helps pinpoint where to go digging.
What are the odds that there's going to be gold there?
Extremely high. Like, pretty well, I could almost guarantee gold. Well, they got you with lots of samples.
Sean Ryan has become the biggest gold prospector in the Yukon and believes he's found 7 million ounces of gold. But he doesn't actually mine the gold himself. He options his claims to larger companies and keeps a royalty. Ryan says he expects digging to begin in a few years.
7 million ounces at today's gold prices, what would that be worth?
It's probably close to $10 billion.
10 billion. But that's not for you.
No.
Out of that, you'd only get 1 or 2%.
That's right.
And what would that make?
Might be in the close to 100 million range.
Yeah, that's our arithmetic as
That's
well.
how your math is working.
It is math, but Sean Ryan says it's also a poker game. A game miners like because it's just another way of playing the odds.
If you play one blackjack game, the probability you're going to lose. If you play 20, if I'm lucky, 2 or 3 are going to be a winner.
And that's enough.
And that'll pay for the moose pasture that I walked over and didn't find anything.
Moose pasture being where there was nothing.
Nothing, yeah, just swamp.
But it's actually in the moose pastures and the caribou migration routes north of Dawson where the next gold rush could take place. It's the Peel watershed and is believed to be rich in minerals. Most of the Peel is part of the Yukon, but you have to take a float plane to get there, to the 26,000 square miles of mountains and lakes that extend up to the Arctic Circle. The government recently took the first steps to open most of the area to mining. Environmentalists were furious. So was wilderness entrepreneur Chris Widrig. He takes hunters to shoot caribou and the occasional grizzly. One of those grizzlies nearly killed him and left him scarred for life.
How much territory would the miners mine?
Too much. There's a frenzy, basically. A gold frenzy. It's all staked. They can't get across the border right now, but, they would like to.
To push back the miners, several groups have taken the government to court.
What is it about this place?
It's wild. There's no roads for 100 miles. There's no development. There's no towns. I think it's special, really.
In a replay of what once happened in America's Wild West, Native Canadians, called the First Nations, are fighting to protect what was originally theirs. Ed Champion is one of their chiefs.
Why do you feel so strongly about this?
Our people have been using this land, have been traversing it, using it for hunting, fishing, sustenance, and you know, for many of our people, it's been their university, it's been their church, it's been it's home, has been home.
And once you're opening up, what, 70% of the land to the government and what the government decides, you no longer have any control over what they do.
That's a major concern.
The biggest concern is that the wilderness will turn from this into this, an abandoned mine just south of the Peel watershed.
All it would take would be one road.
The mining companies promise that they'll leave it as pristine as they found it.
There's no such thing as pristine mine that's been abandoned.
Sean Ryan hopes the wilderness will be opened up for mining because it would create jobs. But he's not going there. He's too much in love with the mushrooms around Dawson and believes that this is where he might just find what men have been searching for in the Yukon for 100 years.
There's still this elusive source of the Klondike.
The mother lode.
Yeah, and nobody's ever found that yet. I'll tell you what keeps me up at night. I fear to stop a mile short of the next ore deposit. So that's what keeps me going.
And now, after all this time, you still get a thrill.
I get so excited sometimes. I feel like an 8-year-old on an Easter egg hunt. You know, when you're out there and you find another Easter egg, well, there's another Easter egg to be found.
Archaeologists often spend years digging and hoping they'll find the remnants of ancient civilizations. There's a lot of ground yet to be uncovered. Archaeologist Sarah Parkak says less than 10% of the Earth's surface has been explored, so she's leading the way to speed up the search. Parkak uses satellite photos to locate ancient sites, and she's finding them, thousands. It's called space archaeology, and it's transforming the field. We met Sarah Parkak in Egypt, doing what she loves most, digging in the dirt. Our journey took us past the most famous archaeological site on Earth, the Pyramids of Giza, rising from the Egyptian desert. Here and elsewhere, modern Egypt is built next to and often on top of ancient Egypt. From Cairo, we traveled 40 miles south and almost 4,000 years back in time to the village of Lisht. Today, the people of Lisht bury their dead in a cemetery at the edge of town, in the same place that ancient Egyptians buried their dead.
Every day I come to the site and it's just blows my mind. You know, this is just one tomb.
At the age of 38, Sarah Parkak is leading the excavation of a tomb that's 3,800 years old.
Were all of the tombs this elaborate?
No. So this is special. This is a big rock-cut tomb of a wealthy Middle Kingdom official. It's big.
We watched Parkak's team meticulously dig with trowels and brushes. After 3 weeks of this, the tomb buried for millennia was slowly revealed. Most of the discoveries were fragments of pots and inscribed stones. That changed the morning we arrived.
Sarah, what is this? What have you found?
So this is beautiful.
Oh, a hand.
Yeah. This is amazing.
Look at this, you've got an arm there.
This is a limestone block that was part of this, probably part of this tomb.
So this is a big find.
It's a very big find. It's the biggest find of our season.
The stone is part of a much larger slab. Look closely and you can make out the lower half of a seated person and the hand of another.
Oh, look at that. That's incredible.
Who's buried here was a mystery until Parkak's team solved it. She took us to an alcove at the back of the tomb where they discovered this stone tablet with a name.
Intef.
Intef. It describes a powerful man, head of the pharaoh's treasury and overseer of his army. Parkak showed us the tablet is damaged, and she wondered whether Intef's enemies desecrated his tomb.
Was he corrupt? Did he step on too many people on his way to the top? Who was this guy? What did he do? But that's what makes archaeology interesting. It's like you're reading the ancient version of the National Enquirer in slow time, right? I often get asked, especially when we're excavating in tombs, don't you feel bad you're disturbing these people, they wanted to be left alone. Yes, that's true, but on the flip side, the ancient Egyptians, they wanted their names to be remembered. And
to let them live on.
Yeah, and Intef and his mom and his children, now the world knows them and knows who they are.
Once freed from the earth, the ancient slab was hoisted using ancient methods. Local villagers do the heavy lifting. The man in charge is Omar Farouk.
They call you Rais.
Yes.
What does that mean?
You call me Rais, this means is a chief.
You're the chief.
Archaeology has been the Farouk family business since the earliest digs in Egypt in the late 19th century. Omar's father, his grandfather, and great-grandfather oversaw digs like this one. For him, there's pride in both the work and the connection to ancient civilization.
You say you are pharaonic people.
You are pharaonic people.
Yeah.
You're from the pharaohs.
Exactly.
And we think the pyramids were built by aliens. Like, all you have to do is watch these modern Egyptian men move a big stone. That's it. That's how the pyramids were built.
You think this is how they built the pyramids?
Yeah, using ramp systems, large groups of men moving stones. It's not rocket science, as it were.
From the first pharaohs to the Roman conquest, ancient Egyptian civilization lasted more than 3,000 years. Many of the most impressive artifacts are inside the famed Cairo Museum. But Sarah Parkak, a well-known Egyptologist, is convinced most of ancient Egypt remains undiscovered. Here at Intef's tomb, she's digging for the main burial chamber. Parkak is adept at this old-school archaeology, but she's ushering in a new school of the science. She's making discoveries from 400 miles above the Earth while sitting at her desk. She gets infrared photos from Digital Globe, a commercial satellite company, and looks for shapes like circles and squares not usually found in nature and not easily visible on the ground that indicate human activity.
So what have you found?
A lot. I'm at the point where I can't keep track.
Parkak has found more than 3,000 ancient settlements in Egypt, Roman sites across Europe and North Africa, Viking sites in Iceland.
So we're going to look up here.
One of her early important finds was in a farm field near the ancient Roman city of Portus. It's a site in Italy where archaeologists have been digging for a decade, but hadn't been able to find the city's amphitheater, until Sarah Parkak looked at the satellite photos.
What you see in this image are fields, but you can't really see much of anything.
Not much.
So we can go to the next image. So if you see a circle right here, what you're looking at is the likely amphitheater of Portus. It's in that field.
How about that? And from the surface, you would see nothing.
Absolutely nothing walking over the top of it.
So your satellite sensors are not peering through the ground.
No.
You're looking for subtle variations on top of the ground.
Right. So every site in the world is covered by different things, whether it's some kind of soil or sand or vegetation. And all of those things are going to be affected in different ways by what's buried beneath the ground, depending on whether it's a ditch or a stone wall or a mud brick building. So it's figuring out, it's puzzling out what's there, what's it made of. Then and only then can you begin processing the image.
At the Portus farm field, that processing shows vegetation, colored orange, that's less healthy than the surrounding crop because of the stones that lie beneath. Parkak teases out the underlying features that can't be seen with the naked eye using sophisticated digital editing. It's like a souped-up Photoshop. Just look at this satellite photo of Egypt's ancient city of Tanis. Parkak fine-tunes the image to turn desert sand into a detailed map. And the structures from a place called Medinet Madi seem to rise from the ground.
It almost is at the point where it feels like cheating, where you can see everything from hundreds of miles in space. And it's like that everywhere.
Was this new technique welcomed by the community of archaeologists?
When my colleagues and I started finding not just one thing or two things, but thousands of things, I think our colleagues were skeptical. I said, how is it possible that you could be looking in this place, that we've been looking for 30 years, and you're seeing thousands of things. Now, everyone's using it.
Sarah Parcak now is making it possible for everyone to look for ancient sites through her new project, Global Explorer. It's a website that invites armchair explorers to flip through satellite images of Peru. Since it started in January, people have examined more than 11 million photos and may have found thousands of unknown sites. The site in Egypt where Parcak is digging has been known to archaeologists for decades. But when Parcak looked at satellite photos of the area, she saw what others didn't, signs of rampant looting.
You can actually see the holes dug by the looters from space.
Easily. It's very clear. It's not like ambiguous blobbiness. You can see before and then after. And there are over 800 of them here.
Over 800 of them?
Yes.
This is the satellite photo of the area from 2010. Here's the same location in 2013. The dark spots are looting pits. Looting spiked after the Arab Spring in 2011 as tourism plummeted and many of the sites were left unprotected. The area was ravaged, and after Parcak shared the photos with the Egyptian government, it asked her to excavate Intef's tomb to preserve and protect what remains.
There's one there. I just tried one down there. It didn't work.
Parcak showed us the looting pits seen from space are all around the ancient cemetery, and she believes the fragments of bones and artifacts scattered around Intef's tomb are debris left behind by looters.
Do you think the looters have gotten most of the antiquities from these tombs already?
So it's this question, how long is a piece of string? How much is left after thousands of years? And we all know that looting is part of the human condition. Many of these tombs were robbed in antiquity. I'm never going to be able to tell you what was in a hole after the looters got there. But,
so these tombs have been looted since ancient times?
They have been.
It's not just a modern phenomenon?
No. It's been going on for thousands of years.
The objects stolen by modern looting can be bought from ritzy galleries, auction houses, and through online sites like eBay. Last November, the U.S. recovered these looted antiquities, including a child's sarcophagus and a mummified hand, and returned them to the Egyptian embassy. They're among hundreds of objects that Egypt has repatriated from around the world. Some go on display in a special exhibit at the Cairo Museum.
The most important thing for archaeological discovery is context. Where did something come from? Then you can begin to understand its function, its importance. That's why for us as archaeologists, looting is such a huge problem, because when an object is taken out of its original context, we don't know where it comes from. We can't tell you anything about it aside from, well, it's a mummy or it's a statue, but that's kind of it. The story doesn't get told.
Archaeology is methodical, hard work. The dirt that's removed is carefully sifted for smaller pieces of stone, bone, and pottery. Parcak assembled a team of specialists to eke out every last clue from what they find.
I always do fork when I'm here.
Rexine Hummel and Bettina Botter specialize in the jigsaw pieces of pots. Amazingly, you can see the thumbprint from the person who made this one.
You are very close to the man or woman who made this. Yes.
How about that?
Yeah. How do you feel now?
Just touching something that's thousands of years old is just, it's kind of electric.
Fingerprint.
Yeah.
That draws me close to this stuff because they have used it, they have made it, they have used it.
They touched it, and now you're touching it.
Exactly.
That's what pulls you back every year. Like, the story is never finished, ever.
You find a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more.
Every year.
We saw the wonders of ancient Egypt emerging from the desert sand. Sarah Parcak says, imagine what more can be found peering down from space.
It's estimated that Italy is home to 2/3 of the world's cultural treasures. Trouble is, the country's too broke to keep its historic ruins, churches, and monuments from crumbling to dust. Italy's up to its neck in debt. Taxes go unpaid, corruption in an overstuffed bureaucracy is rife. But now, some of its most treasured and endangered landmarks are being saved, not by the government, but by a more respectable Italian institution, the fashion business. As we reported last October, it stepped in to rescue some of Italy's most iconic sites, among them the very symbol of its rich, violent, and inventive history, the Colosseum in Rome. With its stunning, timeless sights, it's justifiably called the Eternal City, a holy place to billions, a vast landscape of the sacred and profane, an architectural delight, especially when viewed at sunset. And smack in the middle is the Colosseum, the greatest surviving wonder of the ancient world, a memorial to the rise, decline, and fall of Imperial Rome, a place truly colossal.
We think it seats about 50,000 people, but this number depends on how wide you think the Roman behind was. If you think that they had big behinds, then you calculate less. Small behinds, you calculate more. This is the Temple of Venus in Rome.
Backsides aside, Professor Kimberly Bowes is the director of the American Academy in Rome and an expert on ancient Mediterranean history, who knows every inch of the Colosseum. She's taking us to the very top level, far above where tourists tread, for a site that over the centuries, very few people have seen firsthand.
The view is terrifying. The view is extraordinary. Look at this. This is where the poor people sat.
You really get the scale of this building here, though. Look how big this is. Look how big this is. People are ants.
The place was built by the hands of slaves in just 10 years, finished a mere half-century after the crucifixion. The performers here were gladiators, wild animals, even comedians. I gathered that this place was the entertainment center, the Broadway of its day, yes?
In a way, the whole point is to produce marvels, to produce a spectacle that would have amazed the audience. The people with the most power, the senators, are down at the bottom, and the people with the least power, the slaves and the women, are up at the top.
Women?
Women. You don't want women to get too close to gladiators. You have to keep them separate, because your greatest fear, you have two fears if you're a Roman man. One is that your slave is going to kill you one day in your bed. And your second fear is that your wife is going to run off with a slave, like a gladiator. This is what everyone's afraid of, so you got to put the women up on the top.
So even though the gladiators were slaves, they were kind of the movie stars of their day.
They were.
And we turn to Hollywood for an idea of how it all might have looked.
There's a moment in Gladiator where Russell Crowe walks out right where we are.
Professor Bowes gives the filmmakers high marks for the historical accuracy of their computer recreation of the Colosseum.
The whole drama is really the reenactment of Roman conquest, the continual expansion of the empire.
Backstage was actually underground, the basement.
Until recently, this was just filled with dirt.
A labyrinth of corridors, dungeons for slaves, cages for animals, all brought from the far reaches of the empire, and wooden elevators, raised by ropes and pulleys, leading to trapdoors in the stage.
There's a wonderful scene in Gladiator where the tiger pops out of the floor. This is exactly the kind of thing that would have been used to wow the audience.
Since the 18th century, the Roman Catholic Church has venerated the Colosseum as a symbol of the early Christian martyrs who were put to death for their beliefs. Professor Bowes tells visitors there were indeed early Christians quietly executed elsewhere in Rome. But as for the Colosseum,
We have not one piece of evidence that any Christians were ever killed in this building. Not one. There are, I think, really interesting reasons for this. If you take a group of people who, by all accounts, are extraordinarily brave in the face of certain death, and you put them in this space and put them on display, who's everyone going to cheer for? They're going to cheer for the Christians, right? Because they show such extraordinary bravery. This is not a smart thing to do politically.
So I'm in the famous Colosseum where
6 million tourists a year visit here, snapping selfies and posing with rent-a-gladiators who passed the time with cigarettes and cell phones. The place has survived fires and earthquakes over the centuries. Now there's a new crisis, finding the money to manage the crowds and keep up with basic maintenance. The director of the Colosseum is Rosella Rea.
The money isn't there. There's very little, totally inadequate funding, only 5% of what we need.
Too little money, and from the Italian parliament, too much red tape. A lot of people say the bureaucracy is so top-heavy. That's the reason why things don't get done.
Bureaucracy is not just heavy, it is extremely heavy, and we are the first victims. Bureaucracy for us is a killer.
But that scaffolding you saw earlier is a sign that help is on the way. The Colosseum is getting a badly needed facelift with money from an unlikely source. To prevent further ruin, a benefactor is spending an arm and a leg, $35 million, on a place where 2,000 years ago, gladiators and slaves literally lost arms, legs, and lives, and all in the name of show business. The benefactor is Diego Della Valle, a prominent Italian businessman who knows a lot about the business of showing. Della Valle is CEO of Tod's, the luxury leather goods company. Crafting stylish shoes and bags has long been an Italian specialty. Having made his bundle, Della Valle decided to give some back to the state. Why spend so much of your own money, millions upon millions, to fix this wreck?
Why not? Well, I am Italian. I am very proud to be Italian. And there is a very famous Kennedy speech, no? It's the moment that what is possible for us to do for our country, we need to do now.
The shoes that made Della Valle's fortune are assembled the old-fashioned way, by hand, stitch by stitch. And the work he's funding at the Colosseum is also about as low-tech as it gets. It's being cleaned literally inch by inch to get rid of centuries of caked-on dust, grime, air, and auto pollution. The stone is travertine, a kind of limestone. No chemicals allowed, only purified water and elbow grease. Days, weeks, months, years on end of scrubbing, built by hand, saved by hand. How long is it going to take?
The Colosseum?
Yeah.
I think 3 years from now.
And what will it look like, do you think, when they're finished?
I am very curious.
To get some idea, we were shown a few sections that had been completely cleaned. 2,000 years old and looking almost brand new. And in the world of high style, it's become fashionable to follow Della Valle's example. An entire parade of fashionistas are bankrolling similar worthy causes. The Fendi fashion house donated $3.5 million for some new plumbing for a familiar waterworks. It's the Trevi Fountain.
Marcello, come here.
Where 54 years ago, Marcello Mastroianni and Anita Ekberg went wading in Fellini's La Dolce Vita, The Sweet Life, forever linking Rome and romance.
This movie helped a lot to build really this powerful image of the Trevi Fountain. Cinema has a big power.
Silvia Fendi's grandfather started the business 90 years ago. And as we spoke, huge crowds had a last chance to throw in a coin before the closing of the site for repairs.
It means that you will be in good health in order to come back. So it's very important for us. This country gave us a lot. And so it's nice at a point to give back something.
Elsewhere in Rome, the Bulgari fashion house is paying to clean and repair the Spanish Steps, where tourists stop to rest their feet. A Japanese fashion company with ties to Italy is restoring the Pyramid of Cestius, built to honor a noble Roman 2 decades before the birth of Christ and after the Roman conquest of Egypt. And in Venice, the 400-year-old Rialto Bridge over the Grand Canal will be cleaned and strengthened, thanks to $7 million from this man, Renzo Rosso. Is the government too poor, too broke to maintain its treasures?
No, I think we have to face with the reality. The reality is that they don't have money.
Rosso is a farmer's son, a self-made man known as the jeans genius, as in diesel jeans. He built the brand from the ground up, expanding into other businesses and becoming a billionaire several times over.
And I want more shorts.
His sleek headquarters rival anything in Silicon Valley, what with the espresso bars and daycare, where kids learn the international language of business.
Clap out. Clap in.
But the fashion industry is a rare bright spot in the stagnant Italian economy. And these workers are the lucky ones. Elsewhere, fully half the country's young adults are unemployed. There's corruption, public and private, and widespread tax evasion.
The Italian people are tired of this corruption because we have too many people that steal, too many people that put the money in his pocket. We have 40% of people doesn't pay tax. Can you imagine? 40%. It's unbelievable.
Pope Francis talks about the problem in scathing terms, saying corrupt politicians, businessmen, and priests are everywhere.
In Italia,
and the country's new young prime minister, Matteo Renzi, has declared war on the political establishment, saying the whole system should be scrapped. Diego Della Valle agrees.
I think it's possible now to open a new way. The old point of view was without any sense. I opened a new point of view. I push for the new point of view.
But as Della Valle's scrubbers continue their work, it's worth noting that his generous offer to restore the country's greatest monument was mired in the bureaucratic mud for nearly 3 years before work could begin.
This is the real challenge that Italy has. This is why sites are closed and monuments are falling down. The bureaucracy will have to change in order to actually make it possible for someone to come and say, here, do you want $25 million? Without the bureaucracy saying, well, I don't know, I'll have to think about it.
But time is a way of standing still for Italians. Past glories are always present. The food remains superb, and the noble wines still lubricate the conversation. On the surface, it's still la dolce vita, the sweet life. As for the future, that's somebody else's problem.